Welcome to 10-Minute History, where the past happens fast. I'm your host, Taylor Smith. Joining me today is Laura Briere, who just recently graduated with her master's degree from the Washington State University History Department. Laura, thanks so much for taking the time to sit with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, more than happy to. So tell me and our listeners, what are we talking about today?
We are going to talk about the Shoshone Bannocks' interactions with schools, Anglo-American schools specifically, in the first half of the 20th century.
And for people who might not know, who are the Shoshone Bannock and where roughly are they located?
They're an American and Indian community in Fort Hall, Idaho, which is in the southeastern part of the state.
Laura, what did you learn from your time studying and working with the Shoshone Bannocks in regards to their relationship to Anglo-American education?
I think the most important thing that I learned, what really stood out to me, is that Shoshone Bannock opposition to the schools at the reservation were not about avoiding school altogether, but more about establishing a better school. So there's this traditional belief that American Indians as a whole just rejected Anglo-American education out of hand. But looking at the Shoshone Bannock, you find that this community was approaching education very selectively. It was in addition to traditional education, not a replacement. They had specific expectations. They knew what they wanted to see coming out of these schools. And when they did not see that, they reacted accordingly. Whether that meant traveling, petitions, removing the children, just really a variety of actions that showed that they were very much interested in education, but that they wanted to influence it.
So they want education, but they want it on their own terms. They want an education that suits them.
Yes, what would be best for their community.
So then, what's an example from your research that helps people understand the Shoshone Bannock desire to have education on their terms?
There is a very specific story from 1945, 1946. But let me give you a little bit of background information first. So Fort Hall is divided into communities. There were at least 5 communities that I could recognize and pick out from my research. And one was the Bannock Creek community. And they never, according to all of the resources that I was able to read through and some discussions with Shoshone Bannocks themselves, did not send their children to the boarding school that was on the reservation for 40-some years. They never sent them there. However, during that same time, leaders from Bannock Creek repeatedly petitioned for a day school, a smaller school built right in the middle of their community where the students could attend school during the day and then come home each night, and where the parents could go and interact with the teachers and children during their lessons. This request is not granted until the mid-1930s. A few day schools are built at Fort Hall, one within the Bannock Creek community, and at that point, children in Bannock Creek start attending a school learning to read and write in English. Day schools are very different from the boarding schools that we're used to learning about with American Indian education. Students get to go home each night. And at Fort Hall, at their day schools, the students were actually even allowed to speak Shoshone Bannock in the school as long as they were also reading and writing in English, which was something that the parents really supported. So the Bannock Creek parents were showing up to this day school, watching the lessons take place. The women were using it as a community center as well when the students weren't there. But as much as they liked it, agents and federal officials did not like the day schools as much. They were worried that Shoshone Bannock children were not going to assimilate fast enough into the dominant white society, and that for that to happen, they needed to be put in public schools off of Fort Hall. And so they start to transition into doing this. They consult Bannock Creek parents who say flat out, no, we love the day school. We like what our children are doing here. We do not want them to go to public school. But they end up moving half of the children out of the Bannock Creek day school and placing them in a public school anyway. Parents kind of pick a different route to resist this move and stop meeting that public school's requirements for hygiene. So the students start showing up to the public school, for example, with lice in their hair. And this spreads to the non-American Indian students. So there's a huge uproar, a board meeting is called, and all of the non-Indian parents are up in arms and ask that the Shoshone Bannock children be removed until they can meet those hygienic standards that the public school believed in and was enforcing. And the parents were like, fine, if you want them clean, come clean them yourself. The Shoshone Bannock parents were like, if this is what you expect to see, you may come do it yourself. And what's interesting is about that is before they were in the public school, they were meeting these hygienic practices. They were coming to the day school without the dirty hair, without any concerns or issues with lice. And eventually, after several months when the Shoshone Bannock parents are still not, I guess, helping the children meet those public school expectations, federal officials have to have an emergency meeting and say, we have to get these kids in school somehow. Maybe we should reopen the day school for these families like they've been asking for. So their resistance, their actions actually do force federal officials to reconsider their policy. And they were getting ready to reopen it. The only thing that prevented it is that the law in Idaho changed. And all day schools at Fort Hall were closed. And all Shoshone Bannock students were compelled to go to public school. So Idaho completely took over American Indian education from that point. But I thought it really showed a unique way that families found to show what kind of school they wanted.
So with this example of, in this case, the Bannock Creek community working very cleverly, I think, to build a style of education that works for them, why is the experience of the Shoshone Bannock and the communities at Fort Hall, why is their experience with Anglo-American education important for us to know?
I think there's an all too common victimization narrative in American Indian histories. And I think our on-reservation schools really allow us to look at how parents did indeed influence decisions being made with the education of their children. They did care about schools. They did interact with teachers, parents and community members. They exercise influence. They make requests. They make demands. They react. And I think there's this common misconception that any opposition to schools was only about just hating education out of hand. We don't see the need for it. But as the Shoshone Bannocks demonstrate, they monitored and interacted with schools and cared very much. But we miss that if we continue to only look at off-reservation schools where parents did not have the opportunity to meet with their children and devise ways to influence schooling.
Great. Well, thank you, Laura, for taking the time to sit down with us here at 10 Minute History and talk to us about this important episode, Shoshone Bannock people's experience with Anglo-American education. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks again to Laura for that interview. Some exciting developments at 10 Minute History. We are on a lot more platforms now, pretty much anywhere where you can get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and all the various apps that are associated with those. So wherever you like to get podcasts, you can find 10 Minute History. We especially appreciate if you can leave a review for us on iTunes. It's hugely helpful as we try to get the show off the ground, and tell people you know. Word of mouth is a great way for us to spread awareness about the show. Also, our website is live, www.pasthappensfast.com. You'll find all of our episodes there, as well as instructions on how to submit a proposal if you want to get your work on the podcast. So check out the website for that information. Last thing, I've gotten enough feedback from people that the tagline of "It's a Soft 10" is confusing and most people don't know what it means, so the tagline is currently in revision for our show. It's a lot harder to come up with than I thought it would be, but we'll get there. For now, all I'll say is thanks very much for listening to 10 Minute History. We'll talk to you again in a couple weeks.